Over the past 29 years, Pokémon has released over 100 different games, each with unique ways to interact with the world of Pokémon. Personally, I have found myself fascinated with the different shiny hunts that have hidden themselves across the series. But with literally thousands of different ways to find Pokémon, some of these experiences have been lost to time. Today, we are going to go back through Pokemon's history and discuss 5 shiny Pokemon we will never find again. My name is Professor Rex, certified professor of Pokemon and proud owner of a shiny, fire-breathing Alolan Ninetales, and you've just entered the Professor's Lab.
Professor Rex's Pokédex.
The Pokémon Center New York opened in November 2001, where it became a central hub for Pokémon events in the Western world. It was home to release parties, tournaments, merch drops, and perhaps most importantly, event Pokémon. Most events were distributed past the giant Pokédexes, plushies, and statues at the Gotta Catch 'em All machine. New York became the only place in the world to ever have Shiny Mew available on the original Generation 1 and 2 games. It was also the first place to get Mareep and Houndoom in Generation 3, and home to one of the most sought-after Pokemon in history. For years, the hardware used to give away these Pokemon was thought to have been lost to time, but in 2019, a miracle happened. 15 years after the final events at the Pokémon Center New York, someone reached out to Hard4 Games with what is thought to be the only surviving PCNY distribution machine. Luckily, I just happen to be friends with the Project Pokémon members who have been working on preserving the machine in the time since.
On the second floor of the store were 4 large Pokemon distribution machines known as the Gotta Catch 'em All stations. Once a week, a player could come to the store and insert their game cartridge into one of the machines and receive a special Pokemon. Each week featured a different set of Pokemon to be distributed to players. At the base of all of these machines was an NR GameCube, a Pokemon distribution machine software disk, and this distribution device here, which in extremely simplified terms is just a modified Game Boy Advanced.
For years, members of the Project Pokémon community had been hard at work trying to preserve as many PCNY event Pokemon as they could. And overnight, there was a legitimate way to make more. In 2023, I was able to get hands-on with the machine to obtain some of these Pokemon for myself. I even got an extremely special one, but that's a story for another video.
Oh, that's like legit.
Yeah, that's legit.
Well, the teams involved were able to preserve and recreate just about all of the events that had taken place. There is one that remains unaccounted for. The only one that ever gave away Pokemon that could be shiny hunted and brought to the modern games. In December of 2004, one of the most famous event Pokemon of all time was released at the Pokémon Center New York, the Wish Egg Chansey. Unlike every other Generation 3 event that had been distributed at the PCNY, these Pokemon were given away while still hidden away inside eggs. This was super unique. New York had had a couple egg giveaways for the Game Boy Color, but this was the only one of the Advance era. For us shiny hunters, there is something super interesting about these eggs. If you're familiar with the infamous Manaphy egg hunt, you might already know. These eggs could be traded to become shiny. However, unlike nearly every New York event before it, the Gotta Catch 'em All machine wasn't part of the giveaway at all. The eggs were distributed wirelessly. This did mean that some Pokemon fans were able to farm huge collections of these eggs, but it also means that the preservation of the PCNY distribution machine doesn't get us any closer to creating more of these rare Pokemon eggs. For the lucky few who were able to attend the event during the Christmas rush of 2004, An extremely exclusive shiny hunt sat on the table for any willing to take on the challenge. But this is not a hunt for the faint of heart. While hatching eggs is one of the easiest ways to obtain shinies in the modern day titles, this egg hunt is one of the hardest in the entire franchise. Not just one of the hardest egg hunts, one of the hardest hunts, period. In order to shiny hunt these wish egg Pokemon, hunters have to trade the eggs to a new save, hatch them to check if they're shiny, then reset, create another save, and try again. All while contending with shiny odds of 1 in 8,192. Few players ever got access to these eggs, and at the classic shiny odds of 1 in 8,192, even fewer have ever taken on the challenge of hatching one of these Pokemon in their shiny form, making them some of the rarest shinies to ever exist. And, unless you've been holding onto an egg for the past 20 years, shiny Pokemon we will never find again. As for the history of the Pokemon Center in New York, this event isn't the only thing that has been lost. The venue opened and functioned in a time before the internet was so widespread, so documentation is scarce. My friend Julie has been working on preserving as much as she can, but she still needs our help. If there is any chance that you might have flyers, Pokemon, or especially pictures from the venue, please track them down and contact me. Preserving Pokemon's history is the sort of thing that takes a village. In 2006, Game Freak released the first main series titles for the Nintendo DS. The Sinnoh region was full of new Pokemon, including 5 all-new mythical Pokemon that couldn't be found without obtaining an event. Originally, it was planned that Arceus would be available with the Azure Flute, Shaman required Oak's Letter, and Darkrai couldn't be found without the member card. However, players quickly discovered ways around these limitations. The game had 2 huge bugs that gave players access to hidden areas where these Pokemon could be found. The first is known as the Surf Glitch, and was discovered extremely shortly after the original release of the games in Japan. By using Surf on the door in the Elite Four, it's possible to leave the normal bounds of the game and walk yourself to either New Moon Island or the Flower Paradise. The glitch was so well known that Nintendo had to officially address it just 1 month after the game's release, and release ways to save players from the void. The Surf glitch was fixed in later copies of Japanese Diamond and Pearl, as well as all international releases. However, the problem of skipping the event requirements for these Pokemon was not solved, as the well-known tweaking glitch was discovered not too long after. By loading and unloading portions of the map very quickly, players could cause the game to skip tile generation and allow them to walk on into the mystery zone. So, be it the Japanese games or the international versions, Shaman, Darkrai, and their shiny variants were all available through fairly accessible glitches. If you wanted to go out and find one today, there wouldn't be very much stopping you. However, Game Freak ended up deciding to never release the member card or Oak's Letter for Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. So Pokemon captured this way are actually illegal. After making the decision to forego the release of the event items, Shaman and Darkrai were only released as shiny locked event Pokemon in the 2 original Sinnoh games. With both the Surf glitch and the tweaking glitch fixed in Pokemon Platinum, Game Freak finally made the event-exclusive areas available through Wi-Fi downloads. This meant that these 2 mythical Pokemon were finally released as wild encounters that could legally be shiny. However, there hasn't been an official way to obtain either the Members Card or Oak's Letter since 2009 when the distribution ended. Which means, unless you happen to have a copy of Platinum that obtained the event items for these Pokemon 15 years ago, you might be stuck shiny hunting the illegal ones in Diamond and Pearl. Is what I would say if it was 2019. With the release of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, shiny hunters were lucky enough to get a second chance at these rare Pokemon. However, Game Freak decided to freely give away Mew and Jirachi, and even make the previously inaccessible Hall of Origin a repeatable event, they still made the decision to lock Shaman and Darkrai behind event items that could only be obtained for a very brief time in 2022. After the event window closed on April 30th, 2022, access to Wild Darkrai was permanently locked to players who got the item on their saves before time ran out. Much like the DS games, players starting new saves are never going to be able to shiny hunt another Darkrai on the Switch. However, there is one very odd saving grace for players hoping to get themselves a Shaman without hacking. In the 1.1.2 version of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, a bug existed that allowed players to perform a whole new type of surf glitch. Though on top of needing to find a version 1.1.2 cartridge of BDSP, the hoops you need to jump through to actually pull this off are quite complex, so I've linked a full guide in the description if you'd like to give it a go for yourself. Once you do get to the Flower Paradise, this little hedgehog is yours to hunt and entirely indistinguishable from ones found using the official event item, leaving its availability in a very weird sort of glitchy limbo.
Holy freaking! No way! No way! What the actual?
Players with dreams of shiny hunting Darkrai, however, aren't likely to have them come true anytime soon. While there are glitches that allow you to get to New Moon Island, it ends up being entirely void of any mythical Pokemon, which leaves Darkrai as a shiny most of us will never find again. These two have had a wild history of availability in the main series. It's honestly unfortunate that players who want to go back and experience these events are locked out, especially since these are far from the only instances of super special locations and Pokemon being lost to time. With the release of Pokemon Sword and Shield, Game Freak opened the floodgates to what would become over 50 Pokemon that would never be available again. The wild areas of Galar are dotted with raid dens that host over 500 unique species of Pokemon, more than enough to keep even the most hardcore collectors busy. A dedicated player could shiny hunt just about any of them today if they wanted to, though with no way to boost the standard shiny odds of 1 in 4096, very few players have ever caught a shiny from a raid den. While the wild area itself is expansive and full of life, there are still some Pokemon that can't be found roaming around. For many Pokemon, the only way to catch them with the Galar Origin mark is through these raid dens, which also means for many Pokemon, the only way to catch them in a Master Ball is to seek out these Dynamax phenomena. Even now, in 2025, there is a huge list of Pokemon available in raids. And by using a second Switch without any gym badges, there are a ton of very unique underleveled Pokemon available as well. Because of the level limit when you have 0 gym badges, even higher star raids are brought down to just level 20 for the catch. This leads an opening for some crazy cool finds like level 20 Dragapult, Crocodile, Komodo, and Hydreigon, all of which usually evolve at much higher levels. Though, with it being 2025, there are some raid Pokemon that have been lost to time. Between 2019 and 2022, there were a slew of special event raid dens available through the rotating Wild Area News. While most of the Pokemon in these raids are still available elsewhere in Galar, a few have been lost to time. The earliest of these exclusive Pokemon was Gigantamax Factor Milcery. In February 2020, and again in 2021, the Wild Area News allowed players to track down Milcery with the G-Max Factor. Since they can't eat max soup on the Isle of Armor, this remains the only way to obtain them. But unless you picked up the news and never connected your game to the internet again, you won't have the chance to try and shiny hunt for one anymore. Over the next couple years, other events were released that gave players ways to catch Pokemon not usually seen in the wilds of Galar. These include Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Volt Tackle, Pikachu, Cantonian Meowth, Alolan Raichu, Unovan Yamask, Kanto Ponyta, Alolan Vulpix, Rowlet, Litten, Poplio, Alolan Meowth, Tirtuoga, Archen, and Unovan Darumaka. Unless you held onto the event data by keeping your save file offline, these Pokemon are now unable to be Master Balled with the Galar Origin tag. For players like me who love the oddities of lower leveled Pokemon, an even bigger array of rare Mons have become unavailable as these event dens disappear. It kinda sucks to have level 17 Galar Origin Flygon just vanish from the list of Pokemon you could hunt in the modern day. Though, among all of these event Pokemon, there's one that I believe takes the cake as the craziest raid den shiny you will never find again. This is one of my favorite glitch Pokemon of all time. Meet Aquifer, my illegal Excadrill. Despite being a ground type, he actually knows Hydro Pump. Normally, this Pokemon wouldn't be able to learn a single water type move, so what makes him so special? Well, he originates from a very short-lived raid den in Pokemon Sword and Shield. On April 28th, 2020, a new round of wild area news went live. A mistake meant that Drillbur found in 1-star raids in Pokemon Shield had the move Hydro Pump. This didn't last long, and the raids were fixed within about 12 hours. However, if you had 3 or less gym badges, and never pulled new wild area news, you could hold on to this Hydro Mole indefinitely. My friend Regiultima did just that. The issue is you couldn't connect to the internet to host the raids anymore, or trade the Drillbur online because of the illegal move. Reggie ended up holding onto the raid for years before finally having the chance to trade the Drillbur over to me in Pokemon Scarlet, where the illegal move isn't identified. This Pokemon is so rare that even this non-shiny one is one of my prized possessions. With just a few hours to actually obtain the event, the limitations on what was required to maintain the ability to shiny hunt it, and shiny odds of the full 1 in 4,096 if you manage to figure everything else out, I'm willing to bet that a very small number of shiny Hydromoles ever made it into the hands of collectors. With years worth of wild area news releases, I'm willing to bet that there are shiny Pokemon that were available, but nobody ever found. What are the actual odds someone managed to find a shiny Darmanitan raid, hosted it for a save file with 0 badges, and decided to use a Master Ball? I'm willing to bet this isn't just a Pokemon we don't have the chance to find more of, but one that never existed at all. Now there is one beacon of hope for these extremely rare lost Pokemon. There's a chance that there are save files out there that still have old wild area news, and by extension, these super rare raid dens. If you haven't connected Pokemon Sword or Shield to the internet for a while, it could be worth booting them up to see if you might be one of the lucky few that can shiny hunt these Pokemon that most will never find again. A game chock full of limited time events, and one I feel is often overlooked in the quest for rare Pokemon, is Pokemon Go. While many of the rarest Pokemon in Go wear specialty costumes that can't be transferred, there are still many Pokemon that can only be brought to home by stepping out into the real world and hunting them down. Underleveled Pokemon are one of my favorite things to track down in the entire franchise. But while the level 17 Flygon from the Lost Galar Raid event is definitely cool, Go takes it a step further. Many Pokemon can be found at levels as low as level 1. Since the only requirement for evolving a Pokemon is to have enough candy in your inventory, this opens the floodgates to all sorts of crazy weak, fully evolved Pokemon. But as it sits right now, most of them are still something that can be hunted to this day. Personally, my favorite underleveled shiny Pokemon wouldn't need an evolution to be rare because, well, most legendary Pokemon don't evolve. Now you might be thinking, Rex, I play Pokemon Go every day, And I have like so many shiny legendaries. And that's probably the case for many dedicated Go players. But the shiny legendaries that we are going to talk about today aren't your usual raid encounters, research rewards, or even the more uncommon Go Battle League rewards. Today, we are going to be talking about the ever-elusive, shiny, wild legendaries. As of writing this video, a total of 14 different legendary Pokemon have been available in the wild, and a total of 17 have been available at level 1. 6 of them are still available right now for players who are lucky enough to spot them, but the other 11 could only be found for a limited time. Personally, I've been boots on the ground for each of these limited release low-level legendaries. While my brother did manage to pull off a shiny level 1 Azelf during the 2024 Sinnoh Tour in LA, the closest I've been was during the 2023 Pokemon Go Tour Hoenn. Between the in-person event in Las Vegas and the global event the following weekend, the roaming legendaries were available in the wild with a chance to shine for just 4 days. After that window closed, they were gone for good. But tracking them down was no simple task. The Pokemon Go Tour Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh all played homage to one of my favorite features to exist in the Pokemon series: roaming Pokemon. You see, in Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, the legendary Pokemon Latios and Latias will roam around Hoenn after a special news broadcast that occurs once the player defeats the Elite Four. As they roam around the map, players can encounter them, but they tend to escape very quickly. In the same way, Niantic had the Eon Duo spawning in the wild, but the odds of capturing them was extremely slim, and they would almost always flee after players threw the first ball. Luckily, if you came across a shiny, they would stick around until you caught them, or ran out of balls. With such a small window to find these extremely rare shiny Pokemon, I took to the skies, flying out to meet up with the crew in the City of Sin with a single goal: to track down a shiny Latios or Latias before returning back to a cold Canadian February. Honestly, the whole adventure should be its own video, but here's a quick recap. I ran around the desert seeing dozens of roaming laddies. Most ended up being nothing special, but I really needed that low-level airplane.
This is what we have to do to get these laddies. Finding a shiny Latias is no easy job. It takes strategy, dedication, and hard work.
Luckily, after running from spawn to spawn, a golden Latias finally appeared.
It ended up being worth it. I ran across the park and we tracked one down. A shiny, low-level Latias.
It wasn't the level 1 I had hoped for, but level 2 was pretty darn close. After returning to Toronto, I braved the cold with the hopes of tracking down more, but my plans were foiled by the fact that the in-game weather was windy for almost the entire weekend. This boosted the levels I could find from a range of 1 to 30 to 6 to 35. Even with all the preparation in the world, not everyone had the chance to shiny hunt for these level 1 Pokemon. If I hadn't flown all the way to Vegas, the windy weather during the global event would have made this a shiny I could never get. And once the event ended on February 26th, 2023, they became shinies all of us would never find again. For Pokemon's 20th anniversary celebration, they announced a re-release of the iconic games that started it all. On February 27th, 2016, Pokemon Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow had their long-awaited Virtual Console releases. Since these games were originally released on a console that only supported black and white pixels, differently colored Pokemon simply weren't possible. Shiny Pokemon just weren't a thing in Generation 1 Pokemon games. When Gold and Silver were released, Game Freak implemented a way for Pokemon to be brought from the originals into a world of color. For some Pokemon, there was a chance they would gain an alternative color in Johto. You see, in Generation 2, a Pokemon's IVs, which are the secret values that give wild Pokemon of the same species different stats, are also used to decide if a Pokemon is shiny. If a Pokemon has a specific spread of IVs, namely 10 defense, special, and speed, along with any of these 8 attack IVs, they'll be shiny. However, this had one weird and unintended consequence. These stats are also used for a few other things, like an unknown's form and a Pokemon's gender. This is why only the I and V form of Shiny Unknown can be found in the original implementation of the Ruins of Elf. Since the gender and shininess of a Pokemon are both tied to the attack IV, Pokemon that have a gender ratio of 1 female for every 7 males can only be shiny when they're all male. No matter what you do, when you bring your first partner Pokemon, fossil Pokemon, Evolution, or Sleepy Snorlax up into the newer generation of games, it will never end up as a shiny female Pokemon. Though there was a brief moment in time where that wasn't 100% true. Despite the fact that Game Freak never released any official way to move your Pokemon from the physical releases of Generation 1 and 2 up to the newer games, they did give players a way to transport Pokemon from the Virtual Console directly into Pokemon Bank. On January 27th, 2017, players were finally able to bring Pokemon from the Game Boy games into the modern era. And, oddly enough, players quickly discovered that some of their Pokemon had a chance to become shiny when moving through PokeTransporter. Because of some weird limitations on what IV spreads are available for wild Pokemon, nearly all wild Pokemon found in red, blue, green, and yellow won't ever be shiny when brought to gold, silver, or crystal. However, gift Pokemon, Pokemon traded with NPCs, found through fishing, bought from the Game Corner, and Pokemon encountered as sprites in the overworld don't have these same limitations. So, Virtual Console shiny hunters have been searching for them since 2017.
Wait, is this a shiny? This is a shiny!
In 2025, it's still possible to shiny hunt any of these Pokemon. But when PokeTransporter first got support for the Virtual Console titles, it had a few differences from how it works today. Originally, the developers made a little mistake that swapped the attack and defense IV requirements for determining a shiny. Something that surprisingly still left randomly encountered Pokemon essentially unhuntable. But in addition to this, PokeTransporter also entirely ignored the attack IV requirements for male versus female Pokemon. Presumably, this was an oversight since genders weren't a thing on the original Game Boy games. Instead of assigning gender by attack IV, PokeTransporter would assign them entirely randomly. This opened up a very small window for something that has never been possible before. Generation 1 shiny Pokemon from this group of Pokemon species. Though, with genders being assigned randomly, the odds of one of these Pokemon traveling through time and space, then popping out the other end as a female shiny, was just 1 in 65,536.
Wow!
It was reported that over 1.5 million copies of the game sold on the 3DS eShop in its first couple months. Just about every player who picked up one of the games would have been given a first partner Pokemon, encountered Snorlax, wandered through Celadon, and found their ways to the Pokemon Lab. Even with just a few chances at a shiny for every playthrough, the odds are that there was a Pokemon out there that would have become our shiny queen. Though there are still a couple sticks in the mud. Firstly, there really wasn't any way for the average player to know if they had a shiny at all. It's not like the game would tell them until it was moved into Pokemon Bank. Also, support for PokeTransporter wasn't released until 11 months after the Virtual Console titles initially dropped. And majorly, on September 6th, 2017, 222 days after the initial update that had allowed Pokemon to move from the Virtual Console titles into Pokemon Bank, PokeTransporter was updated to calculate shininess and gender like Gold and Silver do. The only ones with a chance at this rare Pokemon were ones who had randomly decided to move Pokemon into Sun and Moon, perhaps fans looking to get the rare hidden abilities, or shiny hunters. Even then, any of them would have needed to do that transfer within that 222-day window. I feel like there has to be someone out there with one of these insanely rare shiny Pokemon. Some fans must have been excited to bring their starters forward, so there's a chance one of our shiny queens popped up that way. And since the fossil Pokemon hadn't had their hidden abilities available since the DS era, I have to believe there must have been people that transferred them in for that reason alone. But oddly enough, shiny hunters might be our least likely category. Back in 2017, I don't think anyone really thought much about this. There really weren't that many people shiny hunting in Generation 1 at the time, and those that were seemed to be mostly focused on the legendary Pokemon Moltres, Zapdos, Articuno, and Mewtwo. But even still, I couldn't shake the feeling that one of these female shinies had to exist. So I started digging. After scrolling through page after page after page of tweets, I was only able to find a couple shinies that had been fished up and brought into Sun and Moon. I felt my heart skip a beat for a second when I saw a post by a Japanese Pokemon fan. A shiny Eevee that ended up being male. Hours on Twitter ended up being a bust. The shiny Pokemon subreddit was no luckier. So I decided to search through the shiny Pokemon Discord. I found a shiny hunter named Scoreless Pine who had been looking for Kabuto but never finished the hunt before the deadline. Estradal had tracked down a shiny but not one of the elusive queens. And then I found a shiny hunter who had managed to find 3 Pokemon that would give us a chance to prove one of these shinies existed. The first, an Eevee, somewhat vain, modest, and frustratingly male. The second, a Kabuto, brought into bank at level 30 with a hardy nature, was also male. But the third, a shiny Charmander, left me at an impasse. The hunter had pretty well wiped themselves off the internet. All that was left of it was the title to an old YouTube video. Shiny Charmander from Gen 1 Virtual Console, after 1,276 soft resets. That is all I was ever able to find. There is a 1 in 8 chance that that Charmander became a female shiny. But the odds are, I'll never know. Maybe it's better that way. Even though I can't prove that a Generation 1 shiny female from the 1-to-7 gender ratio exists right now, I can walk away knowing that one might be out there, waiting to be discovered. Either way, one thing is certain. After PokeTransporter was updated, they would have become shinies that no one will ever find again. I hope you enjoyed joining me on this journey through shiny hunting history. I had a lot of fun researching everything and adding to my collection of useless Pokemon knowledge. If this video is well received, I already have enough Pokemon picked out to make at least 2 more episodes, so give this video a like, catch that subscribe button, and if you made it this far, why not check out this video to learn about that crazy shiny Alolan Ninetales I mentioned earlier.